The Edifice Complex podcast is brought to you by DCM, the Drawing Specialists, Blue Rhythm Commissioning Software, and Sensor Suite, the future of intelligent buildings.
Welcome to the Edifice Complex, the property design and development podcast. Let your hosts Adam Muggleton and Robert Bean keep you up with who is innovating and doing great work, perspective on the adjacent possible, and challenges to the status quo.
Welcome to the Edifice Complex. I'm Robert Bean, your co-host and an unofficial mediator here with my colleague, official agitator, friend and Yoda of most everything to do with buildings, Mr. Adam Muggleton. Say hello, Sir Yoda.
Hello, Yoda. So this is interesting. Lloyd is one of the people I follow intently on LinkedIn because he says the sort of stuff I want to say, but normally gets there before me. So this should be an interesting conversation.
Yeah, we're not going to do a full introduction because our guest today, Lloyd Alter, has been on before, and Lloyd's a prolific writer on just about anything and everything to do with architecture, property development, social justice, culture, whatever. Is there any limit to your subjects, Lloyd?
Well, when you had to crank out 2 posts a day, you had to look everywhere for things to write about. So no.
And I'm with Adam. I mean, anytime you post something, I read it. Sometimes I reply, sometimes I don't get to it because I'm, like everybody else. But I try to read every bit of your stuff. You've been bang on a lot of it, and you get people thinking, which sometimes causes friction within the social media community. But it's all good stuff. So tell us what's happening in your world these days.
Well, it's really interesting. As you know, I've been writing for Tree Hugger for 18 years, 15 of them full time. And it's gone through a couple of different owners. And last Thursday morning, I get an email at 9:15 from the head of the company, the CEO, saying, there are going to be some cutbacks. And then a half an hour later, I get an email saying, you've got a Zoom call scheduled for 12:45. And at 12:49, I was unemployed after so many years.
Wow.
Unbelievably fast. And at midnight, my Slack died and my Gmail died, and I was disconnected completely. And it's a wild experience. I mean, a lot of people in tech and in the corporate world there, they get escorted out with the box. My computer, they'd given me a beautiful MacBook M1 MacBook Pro that shut itself down at midnight, and that's how it goes. I'm glad I had my own M1 that I'm talking to you guys on. So it was wild and shocking and not totally unexpected. The people who owned it used to be called About.com, and they were a site where people went looking for information. Yeah. And there was a whole side of the site where they had writers doing what they called evergreen stuff. If you're looking up something on sustainability, it's here. And we were just the sort of froth on top to what their real mission was, I think, which is sort of responding to typical internet searches. So I was not entirely surprised, and I'm not a kid. It's not a shocker, and I'm kind of prepared, and people started calling me the very next day.
Wow.
I'd set up a Substack when I was promoting my last book, Living the 1.5 Degree Lifestyle, and hadn't used it. But there's a phrase I'm using a lot, which my wife's mother told her when she got married, which is begin as you mean to go on. And it's a wonderful expression. And I just got out of bed on Friday and started writing a very long Substack and said, I'm just still working. And literally by the end of the day, I had one offer to write a column for a magazine, and then another offer from a big American publication where both the managing editor and the publisher independently wrote me letters, not knowing each other was writing. So I'll be fine. The real question I have is, I want to be like Robert and not work so hard as we used to. And just take it a little easier and do whatever I want to do instead of having to get up and say, what the hell am I going to write about today?
Hey, Robert, you're a lifestyle guru. You didn't know.
Well, and it's interesting because I did a little bit of background when I found out that you have a career change, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's owned, the Tree Hugger is owned by Meredith.
Meredith, yes.
Yeah, which for those that are listening, like they're the big publishing house that does Home and Garden and Family. And I think People magazine's the biggest thing.
Wow,
and that was the real turn. I've been there 2 years, and when we were just working for Dotdash, which was a media company only that had a couple of media sites. Then it was all one crowd. But the big eye turned when they spent $2.7 billion to buy Meredith. The big eye turned to People magazine and we became a teensy fish in a very big sea.
Yeah.
So recognize. So I was invited down to Meredith a number of years ago, courtesy of Uponor, because the publishers wanted to do some articles and stuff. Anyways, it was a cool experience because I got to go into their studios, right? Like the garden studios, the bathroom studios, the living room studios. So they change it all up, right? It's like a movie set.
Right. That's amazing.
Yeah. So anyways, so when I read your note and found out who was responsible, Lloyd, damn it.
We're going to release some flying monkeys to get them, Lloyd, on your behalf.
Right.
So in a way, there's two ways to go, right? Sometimes you wake up and you feel relieved, right? When you stop and think about it. Immediately, you always feel a bit, rejected, right? But, this is probably just a little fork in the road, I'd suggest. You're going to get other writing gigs, things are going to go on. I mean, are Tree Hugger going to shut down, or do you think they're going to carry on?
No, they'll carry on pumping out for the stuff for Google search. There are thousands and thousands of entries there, and they'll keep doing what they're doing.
Right.
And I'll continue making money from it. But there's one person left who I guess is just going to be sweeping the floor and making sure that the post links still work right and things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's a body of knowledge out there, right? And it generates clicks and SEO.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
that sort of makes sense. I mean, it's when you're Meredith, environmentalism, ESG, this is a very niche subject matter, right?
Well, this is why Tree Hugger's gone through all of these owners over the years, because everybody thinks, sustainability is so important and people are so interested in it. And frankly, they're not, especially if you look at a lot of sustainability sites with climate change, where, frankly, you want to slit your wrists after you go on these sites because the whole world is ending in that. And I always tried to make, I never said that it's too late for 1.5 degrees. I've never said, oh, my God, we're all going to die. We know exactly what we have to do to fix it, and we can fix it. And the problem is that everybody's just having such a good time and doesn't want to fix it.
Actually, you have hit on a real point for me. So I am a real believer in addressing environmental degradation, pollution, and that's really where the action should be. Somehow this thing's been mismarketed and labeled. Calling it climate change, people think, that's an act of God, what can I do about it? But you can damn well do something about pollution and environmental degradation, right?
Yes,
and
absolutely.
This is the issue. And then, because this call it mismarketing, has led to a cult of doom almost, right? Where everyone's boxed themselves into this doom scrolling thing and no one's actually doing anything.
Yeah, there are a lot of doomers out there, and it's a real problem. And even good websites like Grist will have headlines like 1.5 degrees is lost. And I said, well, no, you can just look at the graphs, and we know if we all stopped driving gasoline cars, and if we built proper buildings, and if we did this and we did that, we could dramatically reduce our carbon down to the levels we have to very quickly.
Yeah,
I had a great.
Everybody wants their F-150 and their big house and their flight to Bermuda.
I borrow as a line I borrow from you all the time when people say, "Oh, isn't it great about COP? Insert your year, right?" And I say it's bullshit. It's non-binding, and in Canada and America, the land which sells the most F-150 trucks everywhere, it's never going to happen. So let's just not get excited, because these COP conferences, yes, they're great intention, but they give people cover to not do stuff.
Right, absolutely.
Right.
I think the fundamental problem that they made also in all of their marketing is they keep talking about, oh, we have to cut our emissions in half by 2030, and they keep drawing these graphs. Yeah. And it's sort of like when I retire, I say, okay, I'm going to buy a yacht now, and in 10 years I'll eat cat food, because, they're just pushing off, saying we'll have fun now. Instead, if you look in the IPCC report, they actually have basic mathematically calculated ceilings. We can put this much carbon into the air, and every kilogram of carbon we put into the air goes against the ceiling. We're drawing against a bank rather than, I think, saying, we've got to curve down. We just have to think about every one of them, every kilogram, as if it's important.
Yeah. I think it's even worse than that, because it is like a cult, and this is how you know it's a cult, right? When you get a cult that says the world's going to end in 2012, then it doesn't end. What do? They don't go, oh, we were wrong. They double down. Oh, it was the wrong year. It was on this, right? And then there's a new thing. This is exactly what we're doing. Net zero by 2030. Not going to happen. So, like all good cultists, we go, oh, yeah, it didn't happen because X, Y, Z. Then we're going to have a new, it's 2040. It's a cult. Right. What we've really got to do is face facts. So this is, again, I'm going to get triggered in a minute. I'm channeling my inner Lloyd now. Right. So, there's a great book that's just been released about cobalt mining in the Congo.
Right.
Right. So this guy was really affected. This journalist went there. He was really affected by it. I mean, it almost broke him. And what he went there and discovered was, he's from the West. He's from America. He's surrounded by people who go, I bought a Tesla, climate change solved, right? He goes to the Congo. So you ever seen the movie Blood Diamonds? With so it's about conflict diamonds.
I know what it's about, but I have not seen it. Yes.
You're a horrific person, and Naomi Campbell got caught with this. She's wearing diamonds, conflict diamonds. Poor African kids dug them out of the ground. Don't do that. Them same African kids are digging the cobalt out of the ground for your Tesla and for all the minerals in your smartphone. So you're supporting that, right?
Well, but then Tesla has re-engineered their batteries to not have any cobalt.
Yeah, but that's done. An ongoing thing. But my point is, even the mobile phones we use, the laptops we use, this is where it all begins. So if you're going to wave your iPhone at me and tell me off, I'm going to headbutt you if I'm in front of you. This is how it goes. Because I'm 60 and I do not give my career is over. I do not give a F about anything anymore. But the cultism and the delusion and the virtue signaling is driving me to almost violence right now. I cannot take it anymore. Which is why I enjoy your writing, because you express my rage much better than I do.
Okay, well, I guess I won't talk about my bicycle and my my virtue signaling. Okay.
No, virtue signaling is fine if you're not wearing it like a cloak of invisibility. You know what I mean?
Right.
Getting a bike and having a bike is great. Getting a bike and putting it, and going, I've got a bike, I'm better than you, or I've got a Tesla. A Tesla is the same. In the 80s, a gold Rolex and a Lambo. The equivalent today is a Tesla and a passive house. in my opinion.
Oh,
I hope everyone's triggered by now because I'm just
strong words. Strong words. My problem with the Tesla is the thing that I'm writing my next book about and that I'm always going on about, which is the upfront carbon, the embodied carbon of making it. Takes a lot of stuff to build that car and a lot of stuff to build batteries. And, a Model 3, their smallest one, is about sort of 12 tons of upfront carbon to make it. And then you've, of course, got the upfront carbon to the giant gigafactories where they make everything. Yeah. It goes all right down the line. It's because of the carbon that goes into it. If you go over its average expected lifespan, it's still putting out, even running on clean electricity, about a third as much carbon as a gasoline car. Still a third, which is still too much.
Do you guys remember when Natural Capitalism was published? Rocky Mountain Institute, Natural Capitalism?
That was a long time ago.
It was a long time ago. And yet the messages of that book are still true today. And that book changed the way I thought about things. We'll talk about a component, like a high efficiency furnace or a high efficiency boiler. Let's say a boiler, for example, that's made in Europe, right? So it's capable of getting 97% combustion efficiency. But by the time you get the crap out of the ground, make all the little parts, have it assembled, all gets shipped to a manufacturer to assemble it, ships it via truck to a rail yard, who takes it to the shipping docks, who puts it on a diesel-powered ship, sails all the way across to North America, where it gets unloaded by a truck, takes it to a rail yard, right, to a central distribution place, and then it gets, trucked somewhere else. And then a contractor goes to buy that at the wholesaler, and then he drives back and forth all long, right?
It's a lot. It adds up.
It does. And so by the time that thing is actually commissioned, and then eventually at the end of its life, put to death, any efficiencies of that device were gone.
Well, it's worse than that. It's worse than that. When I first renovated this house that I'm in now, which was built in 1913, it had a 50-year-old gas boiler in it to run the radiators. And you know how inefficient those were. So when I did my first renovation of the house just after we moved in, I got a German Rinnai hot water wall-mounted little suitcase boiler that never could actually pump out enough hot water to actually do the house. And 10 years later, the thing was dead. 10 years. Well, the previous furnaces would last 50 years.
Yeah.
I had to go out and buy a new one, a Lars sitting over there, which in 2014. Now, of course, I'd get a heat pump, but I couldn't in 2014. And, they're incredibly complex. And it's like washing machines only last 7 years now. You change your top loader, which you could still be using my mom's. You get the fancy Japanese, the Korean front loaders, and they just tell you 7 years. You got to get a new one. There's so much embodied carbon in throwing away these stupid, efficient appliances.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
It's where you draw the boundary, right? So there's the manufacture, there's the use, and then the disposal. So going back to battery-powered cars, right? That's something yet to really unfold properly, how the disposal and reuse of those batteries goes on, right?
Well, there is a company called Redwood that is recycling and taking them all back.
Right.
A lot of the older ones are being switched to buildings, putting in houses. But the main thing about electric cars is that they're so simple. They're just going to go forever. Nobody knows how long these things will last. But I suspect that, if the bodies don't totally rust out, that the engines will go way longer than anyone estimated. And the batteries already are. I mean, I have a friend who has a Nissan Leaf that started 10 years ago when he bought it with, and it's still at 80% of its battery power.
That's interesting. So one of my theories is there's going to be this whole new industry is going to, I agree with that, and the longevity. So that longevity sort of theory works as long as people like Tesla let go of the IP around the software that drives them, right? And then you're going to get this whole other industry burst out of the ground that's going to do with customization, right? So say you got a Tesla, right? You buy it from Elon. Thanks very much. 4 years later, 5 years on, you own it. Assuming Elon lets you go with the software, which he won't, but let's assume he did, you can then take that and just repurpose that car, right? New panels, new look, new interior. It's a new car at that point, right?
Yeah. Well, it's built like a skateboard. The top just drops on, like the Model Y. The fancier Model Y is just a different lid dropped on a Model 3.
It's going to come down to, and it might take legislation. Like if I've got friends who got Teslas, right? So software updates get pumped in overnight. You don't even know, which is a good and bad thing. Someone forgot. So a friend of mine, that changed bank accounts, forgot to change his lease payment. Tesla just shut that thing off.
Just shut off the car.
Boom,
wow.
You're gone. So, that's, if you're a libertarian like me, that's not good, right? So it's actually going to come down to who owns the software eventually. The hardware is going to become like your laptop. Who cares? In my views.
John Deere has been having a fight over the software in its tractors for years, that people couldn't, farmers who fix their own stuff all the time could not get in and do anything in the tractors. And there was a huge lawsuit that went on for years. And just, I think, 2 months ago, they finally settled, and John Deere gave up and said, you buy the tractor, you have a right to get in there and modify it and do what you want in it. And that, I think, the same thing will probably happen to Tesla.
Yeah, that's what it needs. It needs these precedents to be in place so we can move forward. But I think it will get resolved. I think there's going to be a big industry repurposing cars and making them look trendy and sexy again. And there'll be another industry like modifying the software,
What always bothered me about the car, and what bothers me about digital cameras too, is that, let's talk about the camera. It was traditionally designed, the 35 millimeter camera, to have film go from one spool to another spool with a lens around there and a pentaprism mirror on top.
Yeah.
And then digital cameras come along. And when they first started, people were making all kinds of configurations of cameras. And look at it now. They all look like damn regular conventional cameras. There's absolutely no reason for this to be. They're ergonomic monsters. You can't hold them properly. If they were designed, Nikon designed one that was designed around the fact, okay, we can make a camera anything we want it to be. And it twisted this way, and you held it like this, and it was comfortable, and it was easy to use, and you could go like that, and you could go like that. And what happens? The only ones that sell look like damn old-fashioned cameras. And you have to have fold-down backs to do this and to do that, and your hands get sore. It's ridiculous. And cars are the same. There's no reason that a car like a Ford 150 electric truck should have the ridiculously high hood with nothing in it. Well, you don't have to kill people with your car anymore. You could slope the front. You could do all kinds of things.
You could do a clean kill with a axe on the front.
Yes. There's a term for it. It's called survival form. And if you think about motorcycles, right, even when you think about the custom shops, right, you can customize a bike all you like, but at the end of the day, you've got a front wheel, you've got a gas tank, you've got a seat, and even if the gas tank has no gas, because lots of them, like the Honda, has all its gas is under the seat. The electronics is where the tank is. But they create the survival form of the bike because people want to see what the bike represents in their mind, what a motorcycle looks like.
It's like the QWERTY keyboard. It's path dependency, right?
Yes, but there's muscle memory too. I tried to four-jack once, and I could not do it. There's one electric car that I really like called a Canoo, C-A-N-O-O, and it reminds me, the old Volkswagen buses used to come in passenger and delivery and pickup truck and everything. They just had a base and they changed the top. And this Canoo looks like a Volkswagen bus. It's small. It doesn't have big batteries. It comes in pickup. It comes in people. It comes in delivery. And they've nailed it, I think. But everyone else is doing this dependency that you talk about.
You know what? It's thinking out loud here. This is going to hopefully drive a lot of innovation and change in manufacturing. This nimble, fast manufacturing, basic frame, different modular, different expressions on the outer structure. This could be a very exciting new era for manufacturing if it's done right.
Yeah, well, who is it? Emery Levins of RMI was writing in the 90s about that the car should really be like a skateboard that you just put things on top.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not a new idea, but almost nobody's doing it.
Yeah, interesting. That's really interesting. So one of the things I did want to speak to you about as well, because before what we saw happen recently with you and Treehugger, I was going to ask you anyway to talk about your book, The 1.5 Lifestyle.
Yeah.
So let's just dive into that before we jump down any more rabbit holes. There's other stuff I want to ask you, but just on the 1.5.
You're going to hate it. You're going to hate it. You're a libertarian, and I'm doing all this virtual signaling.
Yeah, but what you need to know about me, I have loads of really strong opinions, loosely held.
I have a whole book based on the fact that if you divide the carbon that we're supposed to all average consumption in 2030, if you divide it up by the number of people on the Earth, it's about 2.5 tons of carbon per year. And half the world now lives with emissions of less than 2.5 tons a year, but they're all starving in Africa. I mean, an average Indian is 3. In Africa, a lot of people are under 2.5. 2.5 is poverty, but 2.5 can also be a good number if you have electrified everything and you live in a place like Ontario, where we've got 94% carbon-free electricity. And so I started to see what can I do to live with less than 2.5 tons carbon. And what I learned was that it was a silly exercise, that the things I wanted, giving up red meat was relatively easy. You eat chicken instead, and or pork. You don't have to be a vegetarian. You just have to give up red meat and lamb, which are ruminants. But what I found is that I was able to do it because I live in this house that was built in 1913 in what was a streetcar suburb of Toronto. The streetcar was put in 1913, and the whole area developed instantly around it with houses on narrow lots so that you could walk to the main street where you would do your shopping. So suddenly I said, okay, I'm not going to drive anymore. But I lived in an area where I have 3 big stores within walking distance. I live in the definition of the 15-minute city. I was able to do this because I'm a baby boomer with a certain income who could get ahead and live in the right place, in the right country, in the right province that had this. It was the things that I individually did to lower my carbon footprint didn't amount to much. It was giving up the red meat. It was never driving the car, but getting an e-bike and using my e-bike everywhere. I wrote the book during a pandemic, so I couldn't fly anywhere. That was taken care of for me. But what I learned really is the key to a low carbon lifestyle is to live in a community that's designed properly in a province like British Columbia might be, or Quebec or that, where you've got low carbon electricity, and not to buy a whole pile of junk. Like I found, I have an Apple obsession to own every Apple product going. I got the pods, I got the watch, I'm on my MacBook. I can't show you my phone because I'm using its camera with their wonderful new feature where you can use your phone camera. But I've got everything. And all of these have huge carbon footprints. And Apple is one of the few companies that publishes everything that they do. They give you the full life cycle analysis so that my phone, which weighs nothing to carry and sips electricity, uses nothing to operate because Apple designs them to go all day, has 80 kilograms of upfront carbon, which is what I call it instead of embodied carbon, because it's not embodied, it's in the atmosphere. So I call it upfront carbon. And 80 kilograms of all that stuff that you mentioned that gets dug up, the conflict minerals and that. My MacBook that I'm on is, I think, 150, maybe 200. I had an iMac. It was up at around almost a ton of carbon just in it alone. That when I put this stuff through its usual life, I was actually more carbon per capita in buying all my Apple junk than I'm using burning gas in my Lars boiler over there, because it's an efficient boiler and I've got a lot of people living in the house since I subdivided it. So you don't realize how much sort of needless shopping for fancy gadgets makes a big difference in your life. And that was, I think, my worst eco sin is like keeping buying Apple junk.
So have you changed your buying habits then around that knowledge?
Well, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I am pushing this. First of all, I'm extremely happy with my iPhone 11 Pro. It's got great cameras on it. It works now with this, just started this continuity thing where this quality of this picture is so good that because I've just got my camera sitting behind, my phone sitting behind it. Yes, it's definitely changed.
Nice.
My watch, I will confess that last year I did upgrade from the 4 to the 8, but I love my Apple Watch. So
if you didn't go from 4 to 5 to 6 to 7 to 8, that's the point, right?
No.
Yeah, I agree with that. See,
I wanted a better heart monitor on it for all my exercising, and it's got a better heart monitor.
So it's got utility, right? So again, this is why I quote you a lot. Less, you always remember from our first interview, so you just need less house, less car, less gadgets, right? It's a very simple concept.
I'm writing a new book now that's called Carbon Upfront, where I'm trying, people in the construction industry understand carbon and what embodied carbon is, but nobody else in the world does. And so when we start talking about iPhones and we start talking about fast fashion and buying a lot of clothing, when you start talking about everything else in your life, people have to understand that there's upfront carbon in everything. And so that's what I do in the book is I'm going through, well, that puffer jacket that you bought, like it's got this in it and the feathers came from here and the Dacron comes from here. And I'm going through a pile of different things to basically look at these things in our lives that have a lot of upfront carbon.
So I'm on board with exactly what you're saying there completely, because first you need to know what's going on to make an informed decision, right? If I'm a policymaker, it's tricky because our economies are based on infinite growth.
Yes.
Right. So there is a balancing act to be had with damping down that and ramping up alternative jobs, industries, sectors that serve the low carbon economy, right? There's a balancing act there, and that's the tricky thing to pull off.
Well, this is the thing that everybody's arguing about, is that can you decouple the economy from energy, from fossil fuels? And a lot of people don't. In the UK, in particular in France, there's this degrowth movement, which they're talking about, we just have to stop growth. But as soon as you mention degrowth over here, they think you're a commie and you just can't talk anymore at all. Degrowth is not a word you can use here. But decoupling is. And, I thought, well, shit, I've decoupled my transportation from fossil fuels by getting an e-bike.
Yeah.
People are decoupling all the time when they buy heat pumps instead of a gas boiler.
Yeah.
We decoupled our cooking last month when we got an induction range. Yeah. So it's doable. But we can't keep consuming more stuff all the time, because like even when they talk about, they recycle aluminum and that, there's still not enough recycled aluminum because the F-150s keep getting bigger and more stuff gets made out of aluminum to get greater fuel efficiencies. But aluminum, just making it puts carbon dioxide into the air, even if you make it in Quebec or BC.
Yeah.
And digging up the bauxite is like hugely messy.
So your book 1.5 Degrees was really sort of setting the scene for your next book in a way, right? In
Yes.
terms of like working out that carbon calculation on an aggregate. And then you're going to sort of break down the detail in your next book, I guess.
Yes, but it's not like there's a book that's out already. This one, How Bad Are the Bananas, which was an English book that told you how bad everything is. And, you can look up the carbon footprint of everything from a cup of coffee to a hip replacement. I just opened it at the hip replacement. And
that's not foreshadowing, is it?
But it's not useful. It's not useful. You still need a hip replacement. Okay.
Yes.
What you have to, and so you've got to look at beyond the boundaries of just what that thing is and sort of where did the feathers come from for the puffer jacket? Well, they came from the geese in China, and what was really happening to the geese in China? And do you want to wear a jacket that's been scraped off the bellies of geese in China? I'm not sure. All of these decisions that happen when you look through the whole thing. Or, for instance, the love of mass timber now. I'm really getting myself in dangerous water because everybody just loves mass timber. All of British Columbia, everywhere they're building mass timber, mass timber, mass timber. But, mass timber's actually a huge waste of fiber on low-rise buildings. It takes 4 times as much wood to build out of mass timber than it does to build out of good old North American 2x4s. And as soon as I say that, maybe we shouldn't be building 4-story buildings out of mass timber. They look at you like, the trees grow back, the tree goes back. It's fine. The trees then suck up the carbon again. It's fine. You still don't need to keep ripping down forests because you like the look of mass timber when we can use like 1/4 as much wood and be lighter still building with sticks.
Right.
And so it's a very, very unpopular opinion. But it's all about using less, about using as little material as you can for anything. It's what Bucky Fuller called ephemeralization. Use less and less and less until you're using nothing, he said. It's what I'm in the new book. I'm looking at all these experts of it. It was called Frugality by Gosen, the head of Nissan Renault, before he was packed in a suitcase and carried out of Japan. He promoted this. Yeah, he promoted this frugal design where, again, you design as little as possible. If you're building cheap cars, why do you have electric windows when you can have a crank? Why do you have this? Why do you have that? Strip it out. And Nissan became the biggest producers of low-cost cars all over Asia because he just designed it. We're doing this frugally. We're taking everything out of it that we can.
That's interesting, actually.
We need frugal design. We need ephemeral design. We need sufficient design. I've got a chapter on each of these terms, which I can't remember all of them right now. But
people need to know there's a huge amount of relief. It's a psychological relief to not have crap. And we adopted many years ago, Christmas as an example. No more gifts. We don't need more gifts. I don't need any, and in fact, it'd be a penalty. If someone showed up with a gift, it's like they were chastised. It's like, because what are we going to do with this? We've already thrown away all this stuff. And now you keep giving us more crap. Like, stop it. We don't need more stuff.
It's interesting. I had a very, very expensive Christmas because when our gas stove died in November and I finally got the induction, suddenly you've got to get the new pots that are magnetic.
Right.
And, and basically I was buying pots for Christmas, and it's expensive buying good pots.
See,
anyhow.
Boy, you should have bought cast iron like 50 years ago.
Like a gentleman.
I bought, because you can buy them online. I think I bought this one on Etsy, and it was a cast iron. It was from England, and they used it to make biscuits.
Huh.
And I use it to make poached eggs. Now, that thing is, I think it was made in like the late 1800s or something like that.
Wow.
And it will last forever, And it works on induction, and it works on gas. Well, I can't believe I just said the gas word.
So
Right.
we've just killed several industries here and made thousands of people unemployed. You know that, right?
Welcome to reality.
Yeah. So
Sorry
this
about
is
that.
this is what society is struggling with, right? There is a slow motion change going on, right?
Yeah.
Some people are doing it faster than others, but there is a slow motion change in the economy going on, and there's going to be winners and losers, right?
And it's ever been thus. When I was just writing an article about induction ranges, I had found about how hard it is to get people to convert. I found an article in a British Columbia culinary history magazine that talked about what happened. That people used to cook over fireplaces. They would hang their pot on a thing over the fireplace. And in the 1830s, the enclosed stove was invented, the 5-plate stove, that 5 sheets of steel that fit together to make an iron box that you could put wood in and cook on top and heat your house. And it took 50 years for it to change from people cooking on the open hearth, on the open fireplace, to the stoves, primarily because men who didn't do the cooking liked gathering around the fire. They thought it was important family thing, that it was important for the society to have this open fire that you all gathered around. And they liked the way the food came out of the pot from their wife's cooking. And the wives, who liked the second biggest cause of death after childbirth among women was, their dresses catching fire with this open flame thing. And they wanted to change, but can you imagine 50 years for the culture to change from we're cooking open an open fire to we're actually cooking on a stove? That's how slow and how set people are in their ways.
The Edifice Complex will continue in just a moment.
Can you find the drawing and supporting documents you need in less than a minute? Now you can with Echo. It's simple. Just type what you're looking for and press enter. Echo knows your building. Speak with a drawing specialist today. Ask about our special offer of painless onboarding plus 6 months free with Echo. Visit podcast.thedsoffer.com. That's podcast.thedsoffer.com.
And now, back to the show.
I want to go back to what you said there about high density, high density wood construction.
Right.
That's really interesting. So I've had several calls this week on a few projects where they're using mass timber, high density wood construction. Right. Everyone is so excited about it. I'd love to have thrown that grenade in and see what happened.
Well, I mean, it just comes down to the fact that if there is a technology tried and true, like wood frame, that's now legal in most of Canada up to 6 stories, right, then it's very, I think, hard to justify when, every tree that's out there sucking up carbon dioxide, you have to replant it, and then you have to wait for the new one to get big enough to start sucking in carbon dioxide. And even if you plant 2, which you have to because of all the stuff that's being left in the ground from the roots, and that it's still not as efficient a use of material. And this is what I bang on about. What's efficient? What's lowest carbon and most efficient?
I love that. So you'll be doing a sort of chapter on that in your new book about the economics and accounting around that?
Yes. Yeah. I have just finished it. I started with the history of the 2x4. All of these, I start with the history of something. How did we get the 2x4 in the first place? How did it become so dominant? Why did mass timber get developed? Mass timber got developed because the Austrians have been building. There's not an old tree in all of Austria. They've been harvesting and replanting their forests for hundreds of years. And they had a forestry industry, very expensive. And because they were landlocked, they couldn't inexpensively ship 2x4s out. So they had to add value. And they figure, well, if we do this to the 2x4s and glue them together, we can make this whole new material that adds real value. And what do we do in Canada? We don't add value at all. I got sent out on a by the Rainforest Alliance a few years ago to Haida Gwaii. And I was there getting toured by the lumber company, which is indigenous owned and that. And they're taking down these magnificent cedar trees. And they're shipping them off to Japan. They're getting paid for logs to go to Japan. And I said, well, you got to add value, Every building, every architect now loves covering their buildings with what's called shushugi-ban, which is a Japanese technique where you take a plank and you go over it with a blowtorch and you get this black finish and it seals the wood. You put that on and you put linseed oil on and it'll last 100 years. And it's gorgeous. I said, you guys should go into the shushugi-ban business out here and add value to it. And they said, yeah. And what are they doing? They're still just shipping giant logs to Japan. It's where they cut it up and they put a blowtorch to it. So we're what did they call us 100 years ago in Canada? Hewers of wood and drawers of water, and that's all we seem to do.
That's the Canadian business plan, right? I draw shit out of the ground and I grow wood and send it away. That's it.
Yeah. We're now sending wood. Drax, this big company in Britain, bought a couple of mills, and they're now making wood pellets in British Columbia, which they're shipping to England to throw in converted coal-burning furnaces because they pretend it's carbon neutral.
Yep, you buy shares in Drax as a sustainable power
And so,
company.
we're shipping British Columbia to England to burn. And there's nothing I can imagine that's stupider.
Well, it's probably an Amish fireplace.
God, actually, that'd be a great calculation. Like, grow them pellets, pelletize it, transport it, right, and then burn it.
And pretend the carbon dioxide doesn't count because it came from a tree, but it does count. That's just like phony accounting of carbon. You're taking a tree that's sitting there and going, poof, carbon dioxide in a millisecond. It's like that scene in Lord of the Rings where whole trees are being thrown into the pit to make the orcs.
What makes it pretty obscene is you're dragging that wood across one of the largest countries in the world to get it to where it's got to go.
Yeah.
What the hell? That is just... There are so many absurdities in the world when you sort of look for them, right?
Yes.
You like burning gas to cool houses?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, yes.
Like, who came up with that idea? Let's ignite gas to 3,400 degrees Fahrenheit so that we can create 55-degree air temperatures.
Oh, we're on about exergy again.
Yeah, that's
It had to enter the conversation. Sorry.
Yeah. There are two things that I have sort of learned from Robert over the years. The most important lesson I ever got from him was about MRT, and that one has dominated my thinking about, cold walls and mean radiant temperatures and everything there, but also exergy. I'm still wrapping my brain about exergy. Now, Robert, are you familiar with Ayers, Robert Ayers, an economist? He's quite old. He's still alive, but he's got a whole theory that you should look into called exernomics. That it's all based on that our whole economy is based on fundamentally turning energy into stuff. Yes. And as soon as we stop burning energy, we stop burning fossil fuels, our economies will cease to exist because it's all about the exergy, and I can't explain it in detail, but
I think I'm aware of that because he talks about the economic balance between the cost of extracting energy and producing it to what it gives you in return, right? We're reaching that point where the juice might not be worth the squeeze as energy becomes harder and more expensive to get, right?
Well, the whole principle of exergy can be applied to all kinds of models, economic models and engineering models. Right. It's about the appropriate use of a conversion of something.
Yes.
Right. So you're not doing stupid things. And, you know, like bad exergy and an economic thing would be like giving your 8-year-old $100 to go buy candy.
Right.
Yeah, the one it was explained to me was using a 150 truck to pull your lawnmower across the lawn.
Right.
Well, no, yeah, just the F-150 truck for somebody to go buy a quart of milk. I mean, this is bad exergy.
Yeah. Totally. Well, you know, it's interesting because one of the most interesting individuals I ever heard speak, and we may have talked about this before, was an engineer out of Nova Scotia. And we were there for a conference on sustainability. And this guy just happened to grow up the son of a fisherman. So he was very much a man of the land, if you will, or the ocean, as it were. But he just had this brain. He had 3 PhDs. The guy was brilliant.
Two and not enough.
Oceanography, climatology, and what was the other one? Anyways, it didn't. So if you got that kind of knowledge, his job was working for the offshore oil and gas industry. And he said something to the crowd, and that was, listen, temperatures go up, temperatures go down, and that will happen for the rest of our time as far as we can predict. But this whole business of putting a match to hydrocarbons is well below our intellectual capacity. We're so stupid that we have to take a match and light this shit on fire. Come on, people.
Yeah, I like
this
that.
is the guy that worked for the oil and gas industry, right? He said, our intellectual capacity, we're not even operating anywhere near its abilities. And that shows up in our barbaric use of it.
There was an interesting video that went viral. It was a British comedian who gave a speech at Cambridge. And it was a debate at Cambridge University, UK, between wokeism versus what can we really do about it? And his speech was saying, look, the answer to this is technology. It's what this guy's saying. And he challenged the students, this is on you to come up with the technology to solve this problem. He says, because the problem is, his point was, if the UK just slipped into the sea and ceased to exist, it wouldn't make a blind bit of difference to carbon worldwide. So the issue is emerging economies like China, India, Africa. You're not going to stop these people wanting stuff.
No.
It doesn't matter what we do in the West. It's not going to make a blind bit of difference. So what we got to do is find technology solutions for these problems, right? Which is, to that guy's point, burning shit is not enough. We got to find better housing, better forms of transport, higher technology. And that's, for me, when I heard that really resonated with me, because technology and progress and science is the way out of these problems, I think, ultimately.
Yeah, I mean, Lloyd, you probably have the statistics, but the combined population of the United States and Canada represents less than 5% of the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't remember what percentage of carbon contributions we are, but it's totally
It's
I think it's 40. I think it's like 40%. I think it's I can't remember, but it's extremely high. The United States is right after China in terms of emissions, and it's a country with less than a quarter of the population of China.
Well, the U.S. military is in the top 4 or 5 on its own.
Yes, on its own. Yes.
Yeah. So if you go back and you think about the psyche of North Americans was to the rest of the world was, look at us, look how free we are, look at our capitalistic economies, and I'm a capitalistic through and through. But the reality is that it's an embarrassment.
Yes.
I'm almost embarrassed about that whole psyche about look at us as I am about my ancestors who came over and killed everybody.
Right.
Adam, that would be your.
That's my boys.
Your boys, yeah.
That's right.
You're welcome.
I think one of the most interesting examples, is there are levers when we talk about using less and living with less. For instance, everybody's talking heat pump, heat pump, heat pump now. We're all about heat pumps.
Yeah.
And most of the heat pumps were filled traditionally with with hydrofluorocarbons now, and they still, even though they're better than they were, they still have a fairly good global warming index. Now, little heat pumps now can be filled with propane. And they've got a limit of 2.2 pounds of propane on the maximum size of the air conditioner to be considered safe. Why they came up with that when everybody and their dog has a 20-pound cylinder next to their barbecue, I don't know. But they said, oh, no. And the Americans fought it for years, like Dow and DuPont fought this for years because they said, oh, no, this stuff's flammable. It's dangerous. You have to keep buying our stuff. And so what we've got now, that all of these, I think Robert could probably confirm that every heat pump's going to leak eventually. They all do, whether the mechanics put them together wrong or it just happens. Yeah. And so they got a big impact on climate. And really, as far as I'm concerned, we shouldn't be selling any that are not R290s. We're using propane. But that means we've got to build efficient houses, and they can't be too big. Yeah. And so nothing can be looked at independently. Everybody says, oh, heat pumps will save us. Heat pumps connected to solar panels. Well, if we're going to have enough renewable energy, then we got to stop using so much. If we're going to stop using so much, we got to have small heat pumps. If we're going to get rid of hydrofluorocarbons, we've got to use hydrocarbons, and they're flammable and they're limited in their scope. Yeah. And so everything works together. Yeah. And you got to have little vehicles. The average North American trip is 6 miles. On my e-bike, that's so easy. And
so that's a great stat. Say that again. The average North American car trip is 6 miles.
Yes. And
that's great.
It's got to be done.
It's got to be driven probably less than 50 kilometers an hour in a vehicle that can do 170 kilometers an hour.
And it's a floating living room that seats 4 or 6 and that's got one person in it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, make the design of the function that you're doing fit the function. Yeah. You've said it better, Robert, than that about size things for what you need. I live here in what was a 3-story, 6-bedroom house. And I wanted to sell and get a condo. And my wife said, no, I don't want to sell that house. I don't want to live in a condo. And so what we did is, okay, we'll duplex the house. So what I'm sitting in is we ripped down the back porch and that's the stair to the ground floor. And I've got the bedroom there, and I've got the living room upstairs. And then the top 2 floors became a separate apartment, which my wife, much more clever than I am, immediately said, okay, we're renting that to our daughter and her husband. So we now have the 2 of us on the ground floor in a lovely apartment with the same big living room and dining room and kitchen, and 2 rooms down here, and a great little office here. I hate drywall, which is why you see the concrete block. I never, ever wanted to use drywall. So I've got wood and the concrete, and that's why the concrete makes it feel a little basement-y. I don't think I'd do that again. But
we call that industrial chic.
Yes. So the point is that we've got now 3 generations because I've now got 2 grandchildren, my son-in-law and my daughter, and the 2 of us in the house. And it's enough. It's sufficient. And everybody takes care of everybody else. We take care of the little baby. And as my wife says, in a few years, they'll be taking care of me. And
I love that. I'd love to live like that.
It's wonderful.
Yeah.
I have to get up a lot to let the dogs out because they have all these dogs. But there you go.
So, Lloyd, do you think, if you look at other cultures where there was multiple generations in a home, right? And then in North America, as people came over, of course, housing was prolific and affordable. And so everybody's separated. You no longer have families living together. other than those that have come recently and still bringing their cultures. But do you see like long term that we'll go back to that?
Well, it's again all about design. My house was very easy to convert. So it's not that we're living together. We're living in two completely separate apartments. Once early in it, when we didn't lock our doors, when our kids had a party upstairs, one of their drunken guests walked right through our bedroom. But like ever since then,
hey, I know you're Lloyd Alter. I read your shit on Tree Hugger.
But since then, we've all. It's, I couldn't live with them, but what we've got is like two completely separate apartments. And a lot of houses were designed that way. A lot of English houses, you've got the side stair and, it just can separate them easily.
Yeah, that's the thing in the UK. The old Victorian terraces are being split into twos.
Yeah, my sister lives in London, and they actually live in what was previously the attic, the third floor in the attic of a lovely big house. They've got to climb a lot of stairs, but it's wonderful.
Well, we're starting to see that in Edmonton near the university, and a friend of mine has some rental properties up there. It's all student housing, and a lot of people there are putting building garages with suites above them. And so you're increasing the density around the university, which is really easy to get to now because you can walk or take your bikes, and also public transportation is readily available. So we're starting to see that in an older area where they're increasing the density by doing that. And I'm sure some of it's family that are living in those, what do you call them, cottage,
accessory dwelling units or laneway houses.
Laneway, they call it. Yeah. That's a good way. I mean, that was a smart move. The other thing I wanted to touch on with you, Lloyd, is so I've been going to the UK a lot last year on business, and it's interesting what's going on there. There's obviously a lot of high-rise, high-density stuff in London, which is where I was. And there's a lot of skyscrapers there that are sort of in that 30, 40-year zone and being refurbished. And it's really interesting. It's becoming socially unacceptable to knock these things down. So there was a famous case last year. Canary Wharf, this tower is about 35 years old. Someone just wanted to knock it down and rebuild it bigger and taller. And up until this point in time, that was completely acceptable. And it wasn't. The plan application went in, and there was a local outcry, and a lot of activist students got up and said, look, the embodied carbon in this concrete, it's ridiculous. Why are we doing that? Strip it down and reclad it.
And they're very, very good at this in the UK. There's a whole group. There's Architects for Climate Action, and there's Architects Declare, a whole movement that on this. The Norman Foster designed this restaurant in a stick called the Tulip, this really silly thing that should never have been built. And it was the first building that was actually rejected by the planners, saying, all the embodied carbon in this is ridiculous. You shouldn't be doing it.
Yeah, because it's a vanity project.
They've actually accepted my term. They're using it now in the UK for upfront carbon instead of embodied carbon. Because when you use the word embodied, when it was embodied energy, it made sense. But embodied carbon doesn't make sense because the carbon's in the air. And I wanted people to realize it's now carbon. And so if you look at the British books now, they actually call the first stages of the whole life cycle upfront carbon, right up to when it's in the building. Nice. And they acknowledge me as the source of it. It was quite gratifying. It will be my big legacy. But they take it very, very seriously there now. And we should as well. And people just look at you here like you're nuts. In Toronto, they're knocking down 15-story apartment buildings that are perfectly good to put up 50-story apartment buildings, and they justify it because they say, oh, well, we need housing. But that's not the housing we need. We don't need little filing cabinet apartments in 50-story buildings. We need family housing. We need three-bedroom apartments where people can walk down to grade. If you've ever been in Munich or in Vienna, and you see how everybody lives like this.
It's Yeah, the North American cities are they got to become walkable, less cars, more walkable, more trams. I'm a big fan of bringing trams back, right? Get the cars off the road, just trams and lots of walkways and bikeways.
Bikes.
Yeah. And that requires a certain amount of density to actually support it, to have the stores, to have everything. And it's exactly how I live. There was a wonderful study done called the Archetype Study a few years ago by the federal government that looked at 50 neighborhoods in 12 different cities. And one of them was Calgary. And I know Robert knows Calgary. I don't know it all that well. But this study compared the carbon footprint per person of someone who lives in the Mission District in one of those little old buildings in that oldest part of town to someone who lived out in a suburb that started with a B. I can't remember the name of it. And which?
Bear Spa, probably.
Something like that. Yeah. And they found that the person who lived in this 100-year-old building downtown in the Mission District, because of the square footage, the smaller space that they were living in, because they weren't driving everywhere, all of these different conditions that came from living that way meant that they used a fraction of the fossil fuels of someone who lived in the suburb. And it's probably a fun place to live.
Yeah, for sure. You know, I live downtown and I miss living downtown. But when I was there, Lloyd, like we had 3 grocery stores that were all like within walking distance. There was the liquor store, there was the Canadian Tire, there was all kinds of restaurants, there was live music. And in the summertime, you know, when the scooters and the bikes came out, it was vibrant. Yeah. It just lit up. I lived kitty corner to Mountain Equipment Co-op. And every day people were there, you know, getting stuff to go out to the mountains or just walk around town or whatever. But the lifestyle was a healthy, active, engaged community.
And people raise families there.
Yeah.
They can do that.
Yeah. So it's really interesting. I think, you know, the things we're talking about here are happening and are going to happen. It's just an evolution, not a revolution right now, right?
Right.
Which is probably right. You know, actually, this is where I think government, particularly municipalities, have a real role to play. It's about creating the incentives, right? So if you take Toronto, the incentives, if you're the city of Toronto, is, you know, a condo proposal goes in, and the question they ask themselves is how much tax is that going to generate, right? How much property tax? That's as far as that thinking goes.
Well, the other thing, too, is that, you know, they're elected by the people who live in the single-family houses, and they like that single-family zoning. So the only place you can actually build new housing in Toronto is on the main streets or in the former industrial areas where people don't have single-family houses. So you get this incredibly ridiculous spikiness to the city where you'll have, if you look at an aerial view, say, of North York and Toronto, a corridor along Yonge Street with 50-story towers, and 1 block away, you've got suburban bungalows. And it's just ridiculously uneven, and it's so spiky and it's impossible. And they're just now talking about changing the zoning, that they're going to get rid of single family zoning, and if you want to knock down your single family house and build a triplex, that you can actually legally do it. And it's going to be risky for a lot of these politicians because they're going to be alienating all their single family voters.
Yeah, because baby boomers actually vote. That's the point, right?
I mean, and in the suburbs, of course, like they merged Toronto with all of the suburbs. Mike Harris, the premier, did it 20 years ago for the single reason that he wanted to get rid of the commies in Toronto and have them overwhelmed by the suburban voters.
Yeah.
Which has delayed any kind of meaningful change because the suburban developers suburban people want to be able to drive everywhere fast. It's almost impossible to lower the speed limits. The suburban politicians don't see why we need so many libraries downtown or so many parks downtown, because they've all got backyards and they've all got cars. It's a really difficult thing. And Harris, they did this 20 years ago to Hamilton, to Ottawa, and Toronto. And every one of those three cities is a political disaster now.
Yes.
Because
almost ungovernable.
Ungovernable.
Yeah.
Simply because the people downtown want this and the people in the suburbs want that, and nobody wants to pay taxes. And there you go. We look to Alberta. We look to Alberta for enlightened municipal governance. It's crazy.
What we need is the Roman solution. The 6-month dictator comes in, fixes it, retires to Capri, out.
Absolutely.
But it's really interesting, actually. I love the way you're sort of trying to be the example, like with what you're doing, and the way you split your house up, where you live in your house, because in around your house and in the walkable community, because people need to see that is possible, right? If you're surrounded by people with 2 cars, and a pool in the backyard, that's all you see, right?
Yeah. My daughter has a car. And but like her husband, a real city boy, he never learned to drive. And he also never learned to ride a bike. So he would do walk or transit for everything. And when the baby came along, it became a real problem because my daughter now is a chauffeur, having to drive everybody everywhere. And last summer, they bought a really expensive, and I mean it cost as much as a used car, cargo bike. That's an electric cargo bike that the kids can sit in the front and he can take it. And it changed his life, that you could now really live without a car. He has a business where he makes calzones, a form of folded pizza. And now he could load up the cargo bike with all his calzone stuff and go do a pop-up by cargo bike. And he takes my daughter to school every day by cargo bike, and everybody says, "Oh, where do I get one? I have to spend 10 minutes straight getting the baby into the car seat and all the ropes, and the baby's looking up, the kid's looking up, can't see anything." Whereas my granddaughter's just running around looking at the world, just has the time of her life in the cargo bike. And my daughter never uses the car anymore because she likes the bike. I've got the best e-bike story ever to tell you, which is, she had an e-bike, which was actually a conversion, a British design called Switch, where you change the front wheel and which has a motor, and you've got a little battery pack. And when she used the e-bike to go everywhere, and hospital parking, as you well know, is incredibly expensive. The worst thing in Canada is the parking. And so she had to go for an ultrasound when she was 8 months pregnant. And this was at the end of October, 9 months pregnant, almost 9 months. And she gets on her bike and goes to the hospital. And I get a call an hour later. "Dad, can you run down and pick up my bike? They're doing a C-section in an hour." She actually rode her e-bike to what essentially was her delivery.
What?
She should get a sponsorship and a commercial with them.
And the thing is, people would ask, "Well, why would you ride your bike all the way down when you're 9 months pregnant?" She said, "Well, it's no more work than driving because the motor does the work. Parking is free, and I don't get stuck in traffic because I'm in the bike lanes. And why would anyone take a car when you can do that?" And that's the way that she looks at it. And, and people say, "Oh, but don't you freeze?" I said, "Do you ski?" I said, "What do you mean? Do you ski or snowboard in the winter?" "Yeah." "And what do you do?" "Oh, how do you dress?" "I put on this, I put on this." And do you freeze?" "No." Yeah. So, why people think that they can pay to go sit outside in the freezing cold and fall down the hill, yet they can't get on a bike wearing the same clothes, which is what I do.
Also, there's a tremendous...
And I didn't even buy any clothes when I took up winter biking, when I decided to just bike all year. I just got out my ski suit, and I got out my ski helmet, and I got out all the stuff that I had. Didn't have to buy a thing. Yeah.
My most embarrassing story about winter biking was I ride with the bindings. I'm going to change that. I'm too old to ride with bindings anymore.
Oh God, no, I don't do that.
So picture this, right? So you're all dressed up, you're riding your bike, you're locked into the bindings, you're passing all the cars, you come to a train passing, so you can't go. And I'm slowing down, and I can't get my feet out of the bindings.
You're just
I know. I used to have those bindings, and I was at a Toronto intersection, and the red light and the light was just turning green, and I just start moving, and some idiot decides they're walking anyway, and they're right in front of me when I've got the green light, and I jam on the brakes. But like, when you get in those situations, I mean, boom, right in my side. Say, no, one shouldn't do urban biking with bindings.
Yeah, no, I'm changing over.
Yeah.
a bit too much commitment there, Robert. I'm sorry, going to go and say it's a bit.
Crazy.
All right, listen, we're coming up on time. We've been going for about an hour and 20 here, which is pretty cool.
So I actually have a lawyer's call about severance issues.
Okay.
So, I can't say that. That wouldn't be considered disparaging. No.
So we normally finish with a quick fire question each. I'll go with my cheat question, which is, what should we be talking about that no one's talking about right now as far as like sustainability is concerned?
Exactly what we started this discussion with. Use less stuff. Everything should be about using less stuff, how you design, how you shop, what you eat. Everything should be just using less stuff. And we all know we eat more than we should. We drink more than we should. We drive bigger cars than we should. We do all this stuff in excess of what our true need is. And so I think my 3 words on to end every discussion about sustainability is simply use less stuff.
Yeah, that's great wisdom. Lloyd, who out of all of the architectural colleges that are producing the next generation of professionals, what university or college represents your ethos? Who's actually producing students that actually represent what you believe in?
I honestly don't know of any. I couldn't list one. I know I teach at one, and I know people who teach them all over, but it's not a focus anywhere. Where I teach, I am a part-time adjunct teaching one term that's optional to third-year students. Like, how stupid is that? This is being ingrained in first year full time. Everything should be looked at through the prism of sustainability, but nobody is. And I don't have the answer. I know that there are schools in the UK that do a much better job about it. Certainly the students come out about it. The reason that you're hearing so much in the UK about embodied carbon is that they actually talk about it. Yeah. They've got students who set up an organization called Architects for Climate Action there that is just fantastic. They're very serious. And when I did a post on LinkedIn recently, I got the head of it just said, well, because I always wrote about them over here, and I wanted to start a branch over here. And now that I have a little bit of time, I may just start a branch over here.
Yeah, I like that. That's a great idea.
Awesome.
Okay, man. All right.
Lloyd, listen, it's always great having you on. It's been too long since we first had John. You were probably one of our first or one of our earlier,
yeah.
On in the podcast. And here, what year are we in, Adam?
I think you're at 5 here, actually. So I think you was in year 1. So it's been a while. But listen, man, keep doing what you're doing. I love it. It's awesome. Keep provoking, keep posting.
This was a lot of fun. Thank you very much.
The Edifice Complex will continue in just a moment.
Are you struggling with paperwork, spreadsheet overload, and project management? Then Blue Rhythm is the solution to help you. Streamline your commissioning and project management process. Go paperless, increase efficiency, and save money. Blue Rhythm is commissioning and project management software by practitioners for practitioners, adapting to your workflows and processes, and doing things your way. Blue Rhythm provides painless and fast onboarding by bringing your existing workflows, forms, checklists, and issues logs into Blue Rhythm for you. You can use their pre-built templates to customize your commissioning workflows. And Blue Rhythm can fully handle the transition from your current software platform. Blue Rhythm is secure, scalable, and reliable, backed by amazing support, and accessible 24/7 on any Windows, iOS, or Android device. Why are you still using paper and hard-to-control spreadsheets? Start your free Blue Rhythm account today at bluerhythm.com.
Are we there yet? Yes, we are. The future promised real-time monitoring and control of our buildings, and now that is a reality with Sensor Suite. The only question you need to ask yourself is, how much energy and water is my building wasting each year? Sensor Suite will do the rest. With Sensor Suite solutions, any existing building and equipment can be retrofitted with smart sensors and controls that generate an industry-leading high-resolution data feed, unlocking a level of operational optimization and visibility across your entire building portfolio. This allows analysis and targeted interventions that turn old analog buildings into intelligent, energy-efficient grid resources, allowing monitoring and control at your fingertips through Apple, Android, and Windows devices. Make a difference to the environment and start saving money today. Go to sensorsuite.com or call toll-free 1-855-773-6767.
And now, back to the show.
Again, being able to talk to Lloyd, well, we've done a number of repeat guests, and they're really valuable. And Lloyd has come. I mean, like I said, he's a prolific writer about a whole bunch of things. But now with his new career change, he's going to be able to, I think we're going to see some freedom words come out.
Yeah, we're going to see the shackles come off.
Absolutely. So, if you think about Lloyd in the past, probably restrained by political requirements, but now I think we'll see Lloyd, the true Lloyd, come out, which is going to be great. He said something that I wrote down. Begin as you mean to go on.
Yes.
I love that. And when I think back in my own career, and one day you and I were going to talk about business and businesses and business transitions and that type of stuff. And when I sold my business to a large Danish control manufacturer and then got fired for insubordination, and that whole story itself. I'm going to write a book about that, actually. Was actually, there was good and bad things about that. The bad stuff is a lot of really good people that were part of our organization ultimately was disbanded. But every one of them went on to find positions with other companies, and because they were good people, but they moved on, and I even myself, when Lloyd said, begin as you mean to go on, I know when I was working the next day.
Yeah.
I knew what I wanted to do, and I knew that, what needed to get done. And so if you go back to our website, healthyheating.com, that was started in 2004. Well, that came after, a couple of years of doing, I didn't need to work. What I needed to do was find something that fed my passion, and that required a lot of research work, and that's where I started studying human physiology and psychology as it related to the built environment, and then it was off to the races.
That's actually, what? I'm gonna think we will do that episode one day about transition. I've been involved in several disposals and exits, and been involved in a couple of purchases of firms, and it's never about the engineering. It's always about the culture.
Always.
When two cultures come together, it's like two men go in a ring, one man comes out, right? And it's never really discussed, because when you're in that due diligence honeymoon phase, it's going to be great. We're not going to change anything. Don't worry. We love you. And then that deal closes and everything changes, right?
Yeah, totally.
And when a big company takes on a small company, it's easier because you're being absorbed into a big company, right? It's not hard to understand. But it always baffles me how often it fails. I've seen it just watching from outside, watching people like Stantec gobble up small firms. And, after 6 months, the intermediate people start leaving. And after 3 years, the senior people start leaving. So you got to ask yourself, what's the value in that? For Stantec, I don't know, right? I mean, it's alchemy, because you take something that's got a low earnings per share and you wrap it into your thing, which is publicly traded. So you get the immediate bump in balance sheet. But in the longer term, is there real value added there?
Well, and that's a really good question, because then we can start talking about goodwill, right?
Yeah.
And the valuation of goodwill and the retention of that goodwill. And, and that's one of the interesting things, right? Because a lot of these contracts, and we're kind of getting off Lloyd here in a second, but Lloyd's going to go through this, right?
Yeah.
When you think about some of the contracts and an acquisition, they want the senior people to stick around for a couple of years. In fact, it's part of the contract.
Yes.
Right. And so what's interesting is that the founders and the senior people that represent the goodwill of the organization are asked to stick around to defend that goodwill. Ultimately, that's why they do it, is to defend the goodwill of the company, which has some esoteric value to it, right? And then they punt them, or they make it so difficult for them to stick around that the goodwill leaves.
Yeah, I don't know. It's really weird. But I'm going to look at that as an episode, actually. We might try and get it done this year. But going back to Lloyd, I love that focus on carbon up front, because this is the sort of like iceberg situation, right? You don't see what's lurking below and above the surface, right? You just see the building. But that upfront carbon, someone said to me years ago, and this is absolutely right, and this is what Lloyd's onto, sustainability is about where you draw the boundary. If you draw the boundary around the building, it's one thing. If you draw it around the building and the materials going into the building, it's another thing. If you draw it around the materials going in the building and the operation and the disposal, that's something else, right?
Yep.
And where you draw those lines dictates how you see it, how you feel about it, its impact, the decisions made to make it operate and run. And this is where I think the built environment is starting to get there. It's starting to look past the building. It's starting to look at the inputs and the outputs, which is what it needs to do, right? And Lloyd's just early in that thinking.
Yeah, sustainability really, it's a philosophical discussion, and the boundary part of it defines that. Put that into layman's terms for people that are listening. Like, if there's 10 people in the desert and you've got 2 bottles of water to share amongst the 10, well, if you're only a couple miles from the next source of water, you can be pretty sustainable. Like, it's not a life and death situation. But if you're 100 miles or 200 miles from the next source of water, who doesn't get the water? Is it the elderly, the infants? Like, who gets sacrificed? And it's all. And you're right. It's the boundary conditions that you establish.
Yeah, this is where I'm starting to get a little bit upset with the people waving that iPhone at me with conflict minerals in it. Telling me I'm a bad person. I claim no virtue there, and I'm actually not a nice person. So you can't tell me off. But if you're sitting there telling me you're awesome and you're waving something that's packed full of conflict minerals, go F yourself.
Yeah.
Right. So to quote Lloyd,
Totally.
and this is how we should probably finish, it's simple. Use less stuff. Yeah. You don't need the iPhone every year, right? Yeah. I've actually, my daughter got me onto that. She needed a phone in the UK because she was going back to the UK with me. And she went on eBay and bought a used phone that was 2 or 3 years old. I was fascinated by it. She got it. It arrived. She put it next to a current one. It was hard. You were hard pressed to see the difference between the two of them. And it worked fine. And it was $200. Yeah. And she owned it. And ever since that day, I thought, I'm going to buy near new electrical stuff. What am I buying new for? So, there is an aspect to that. But if everyone does it en masse, then you get the BlackBerry syndrome where all of a sudden firms start disappearing, right? So there is an evolution here, but he's onto something there.
And it's a cultural thing too, but it's also lessons that we learn as children. I mean, taking care of your stuff. Like, a lot of people don't know, but I started out in the trades. I had the very first framing hammer that I used when I was like 18 years old or 17 years old. It's lasted, and why would I need a new one? Other than every once in a while, if I do work, I can, there's a cross hatching that helps you hit the nails. But when I think about taking care of things, not the disposable society that many of us operate in, and I think you're right. Having less, taking care of the things that you do have, you don't need all that crap.
So, man, it's a brave new world. We just don't know we're in it, right?
Right.
Like fish at the moment. There's an evolution and revolution
You're
going
absolutely
on.
right, Adam. Yeah.
And we don't know, but it's going. And there's people like Lloyd that push that because he's always the sort of person who's at the pointy, sharp end of stuff, right? He's the one agitating. And you need people like him because that's how you get things done. So I'm all Team Lloyd. I really am.
Yeah. I think Meredith Law, when they closed or laid everybody off their tree hugger, I mean, in many ways, it's going to be good for Lloyd, but ultimately, and I said this to Lloyd on LinkedIn, that he is the brand and he is the jam, and wherever he goes, so will the story go.
Yeah, whatever he does next, he'll take audience with him for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that says a lot about Lloyd, and unfortunately, Meredith lost that resource.
Yeah, well, they're lost, mate. That'll be someone else's gain.
Absolutely.
Okay, awesome. Mate, I'll see you in the next one.
Okay, Adam. Cheers, man. Bye.
You've been listening to the Edifice Complex podcast with Adam Muggleton and Robert Bean. To access show notes for this episode, visit edificecomplexpodcast.com. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a review on iTunes. See you next time.